My son Rodney told me, "Mom, this will be the best Christmas yet." Exactly 3 weeks before he left me standing alone in a silent house with $500 worth of food cooling on the counter. He thought he could use me as a backup plan, a safety net in case his real party fell through. The next day, he stood on my porch, expecting to find a broken, lonely widow desperate for his scraps of attention. He thought my age made me weak, dependent, and too afraid to ever close the door on him. But he didn't know that while he was ignoring my calls to laugh with his friends at a steakhouse, I wasn't crying into my apron. I was replacing him. And when he finally showed up to claim his guilt trip dinner, he realized that the lock on the front door wasn't to keep strangers out. It was to keep his entitlement out. He found out the hard way that a mother's love is unconditional, but her hospitality has an expiration date. Before I tell you exactly how I turned the worst Christmas of my life into the best one, I just want to thank you for listening to an old woman's story. If you believe that self-respect has no age limit, and that sometimes family is who you choose, not who you're born with, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe and maybe tell me which city you're listening from. Your support tells me I'm not alone. Now, let me back up just a little bit and tell you how it happened. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Christmas Day. The house, usually so quiet. I looked over at the wine rack. There, sitting front and center, were 6 bottles of Cabernet Sauvignon. I had paid $48 a bottle for them. I remember standing in the liquor store aisle, staring at the price tag, doing the mental math. Nearly $300 just for the wine. My hands had shaken a little as I handed over my debit card. I'm on a fixed income. That money was supposed to be for my car insurance and the heating bill for January. But Rodney had been specific. Amanda's father only drinks Cabernet, Mom. He had told me over the phone 3 weeks ago. And please, don't get the cheap stuff with the screw top. He notices. So, I didn't get the cheap stuff. I dipped into my emergency savings. I bought the expensive wine. I bought the organic free-range turkey because Amanda says supermarket turkeys are full of hormones. I bought the fresh vanilla beans for the creme brulee instead of the extract. I bought the heavy linen napkins because paper ones are tacky. I wanted today to be perfect. I needed today to be perfect. It started with a phone call in late November. I saw Rodney's name on the caller ID, and my heart actually skipped a beat. That's the sad truth of it. When you live alone in a 4-bedroom house that hasn't seen children running through the halls in 20 years, a phone call from your son feels like a lifeline. "Mom," he said, his voice breathless, like he was in a rush. "We're in a bind. The contractors aren't going to be finished with the kitchen renovation by Christmas. Amanda is freaking out." I had listened, making sympathetic noises. I knew Amanda wanted that open-concept kitchen she saw on TV. "We can't host," Rodney continued. "And Amanda's parents are flying in from Florida. Her sister is coming with the 3 kids. Her brother is bringing his new fiancé. There's nowhere to put everyone." There was a pause. I knew what was coming, and I hated myself for how much I wanted him to ask. "Your house is the only one big enough, Mom. Would you mind? It would just be for dinner. We'll handle everything else. You just open the doors." "I'd love to," I said. The words came out too fast. I sounded desperate. "I can cook. I'll make the roast. Or a turkey." "Turkey," Rodney said quickly. "And ham. Amanda's brother doesn't eat poultry. And Mom, it's going to be 16 people total. Can you handle that?" 16 people. I hadn't cooked for 16 people since my husband, Frank, was alive. That was 15 years ago. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be. My knees swell up if I stand on the tile floor for too long. But I didn't say any of that. "Of course," I said. "I'll take care of it." "You're a lifesaver," he said. And then the kicker, the promise that made me empty my savings account. This will be the best Christmas yet, Mom. We'll make it unforgettable. A real family gathering, just like the old days. Just like the old days. I held on to that phrase for 3 weeks. I scrubbed this house top to bottom. I didn't hire a cleaner because I needed the money for the food. I got down on my hands and knees, which took me 5 minutes to get back up from, and scrubbed the baseboards in the hallway because Amanda has a way of looking at dust that makes you feel like a failure. I polished the silver forks that had tarnished in the drawer. I washed the guest bathroom curtains. I was auditioning. That's what it felt like. I was auditioning to be valuable to them. I wanted Amanda to walk in and say, "Wow, Muriel, you really outdid yourself." I wanted to prove that just because I was 70 years old and lived alone didn't mean I was useless. I wasn't just some old woman to be visited out of obligation once a year. I was the matriarch. I could still run a household. Now, standing in the heat of the kitchen, I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist. The potato peeler had dug a raw spot into my thumb after the 10th pound of russets. 16 people meant a lot of mashed potatoes. I walked into the dining room to check the table for the 5th time. It looked magnificent. I had pulled out the good china, the wedding band pattern with the gold rim that I was usually too afraid to use. The crystal glasses sparkled in the afternoon light coming through the sheer curtains. I had folded the napkins into stiff peaks, just like they do at restaurants. 16 chairs. I had to bring in the patio chairs and cover them with sheets to make enough seating. It was tight, but it worked. It looked like a banquet. It looked like love. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 2:30. They said they would be here at 4 o'clock for appetizers. Plenty of time, I whispered to myself. The silence of the house swallowed my voice. I went back to the kitchen and checked the list taped to the fridge. Turkey basting. Ham, glaze at 3 o'clock. Green bean casserole, ready to bake. Sweet potatoes, needs marshmallows. Salad, chop at 3:30, so it doesn't wilt. Rolls, warming. I had done it all. I had shopped for 3 days, navigating the crowded aisles with my cart overflowing, ignoring the ache in my joints. I had carried 12 heavy bags into the house, 2 by 2, taking breaks to sit on the bottom step of the stairs to catch my breath. I remembered the cashier at the grocery store, a young girl with bright pink fingernails. She had scanned the 3rd leg of lamb, because Rodney mentioned his father-in-law liked variety, and her eyes went wide. Hosting an army? She had joked. My family, I had said, beaming. I couldn't help it. I was proud. My son and his wife. And her family. 16 of us. Wow, she said. That's nice. My grandma usually just orders pizza. I had felt a surge of pity for that grandma. Pizza on Christmas? No, not my family. We did it right. I pulled the heavy roasting pan out of the oven to baste the turkey. The steam hit my face, hot and savory. The bird was golden brown, the skin crisping perfectly. It was a masterpiece, a $300 masterpiece, if you counted the organic herbs and the specialized stuffing ingredients. I carefully poured the drippings over the meat, my wrist trembling slightly under the weight of the ladle. I ignored it. I ignored the fatigue that was making my eyelids heavy. I ignored the fact that I hadn't eaten breakfast or lunch because I was too busy prepping. It didn't matter. In an hour and a half, the driveway would fill up with cars. The doorbell would ring. The silent hallway would be filled with voices and laughter. Rodney would hug me. Amanda might even give me a genuine smile. Her nieces and nephews would run around the yard. I would sit at the head of this table, surrounded by family, and I wouldn't be the lonely widow in the big house anymore. I would be the center of it all. I slid the turkey back in and closed the door with a solid thud. Everything was ready. I went upstairs to change into the red velvet dress I had bought specifically for today. It was a little tight around the waist, but it was festive. I put on my pearls. I put on lipstick. I came back down at 3:45. I lit the candles on the table. The room glowed warmly. I poured myself a glass of water. I wouldn't touch the expensive wine until the guests arrived, and sat on the stool by the window, watching the driveway. The street was empty. A light snow had started to fall, dusting the gray asphalt with white. It was picture perfect. 4 o'clock came. The driveway remained empty. Traffic, I said aloud. It was Christmas, after all. People drove slowly in the snow. I waited. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed the quarter hour, then the half hour. My stomach gave a small, nervous flutter. Not hunger. Something else. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No texts. I looked at the table again. The candles were burning down just a little. The food in the oven was entering that dangerous zone, where perfectly cooked starts turning into dry. They're coming, I told the empty room. Rodney promised. I stood up and went to the oven to turn the temperature down to warm. My hand hovered over the dial. I felt cold, despite the heat of the kitchen. A sudden, irrational thought seized me. What if there was an accident? But no. Rodney was a careful driver. I walked back to the window. The snow was falling harder now. The street lights flickered on. The world outside was gray and cold, but inside I had created a sanctuary of warmth and food. A feast for 16 people. I just needed the people. 4:15 came and went. I moved away from the window and went back into the kitchen. The silence in the house had changed. Before, it was a busy silence, full of anticipation. Now it felt heavy. It felt like the air before a thunderstorm, even though outside it was just snow falling softly on the empty street. They're just stuck, I muttered, opening the oven door again. The heat hit me, but it wasn't welcoming anymore. It was worrying. The turkey, my beautiful, expensive turkey, was getting darker. The skin, which had been a perfect golden crisp 30 minutes ago, was starting to look a little too brown. I grabbed a piece of aluminum foil and tented it over the bird, trying to save it. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from a creeping feeling in my gut that I refused to acknowledge. I turned the oven down to 170 degrees. The lowest setting. The warm setting. It's the setting you use when people are 10 minutes late, not when you don't know where they are. I walked into the dining room. The candles were burning down. Wax was starting to pool at the base of the tall, elegant tapers I had bought just for tonight. I blew them out, one by one. Puff, puff, puff. The thin trails of gray smoke drifted up toward the chandelier. It felt wrong to leave them burning for an empty room. I told myself I would relight them the second headlights swept across the living room wall. 4:45. I went to the living room and sat on the sofa. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't want to miss the sound of a car door closing. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, smoothing the velvet fabric of my dress over my knees. The house was making noises I usually ignored, the settling of the floorboards, the hum of the furnace. Every pop and creak made me jerk my head toward the door. My mind started doing that terrible thing mothers do. I started bargaining. Please let it be traffic. Please let it be a flat tire. Please let it be a minor fender bender where no one is hurt, but it takes a long time to exchange insurance information. Because if it wasn't an accident, then what was it? I walked back to the kitchen. The mashed potatoes. I had whipped them with heavy cream and butter at 3:30, so they would be fluffy. Now, they were sitting in the pot on the back burner. I lifted the lid. A thick skin had formed on top. They looked congealed, ruined. I grabbed a wooden spoon and stirred them aggressively, trying to bring the life back into them. My arm hurt. My back throbbed. I added a splash of milk and turned the burner on low, praying they wouldn't scorch on the bottom. 5 o'clock. The sun had set completely. It was pitch black outside. The streetlights cast long, lonely shadows across the snow. I couldn't wait anymore. I picked up my phone. My fingers felt clumsy as I tapped Rodney's name. It rang, and rang, and rang. "Hey, this is Rodney. Leave a message." His voice was casual, happy. It was a recording from 3 years ago. I waited for the beep. "Rodney? It's Mom. It's 5 o'clock. The turkey is, well, it's done. I've got it keeping warm, but I'm worried about the potatoes. Are you all okay? Is the traffic bad? Just give me a quick ring, so I know you're safe. Love you." I hung up. I stared at the phone, willing it to light up. Nothing. Maybe he was driving. You shouldn't talk and drive. That made sense. I called Amanda. Her phone didn't even ring. It went straight to voicemail. That meant her phone was off. Or dead. Or she had sent me to voicemail. I didn't leave a message for her. I put the phone down on the granite counter, the counter I had spent 2 hours scrubbing yesterday until it shone, and gripped the edge of the sink. 5:30. This wasn't traffic. Even in a blizzard, you call. You text. You say, "Mom, we're running late." I went back to the oven. I pulled the turkey out. It was heavy, so heavy. I set it on the trivet. I lifted the foil. The meat had pulled back from the bone. It looked dry. The juices in the bottom of the pan had evaporated into a dark, sticky sludge. The green bean casserole was mush. The rolls were hard as rocks. The salad in the fridge was limp. I had spent $300 on wine, $500 on food. I had spent 3 days on my feet. I had cleaned the baseboards. And the house was silent. I sat down at the kitchen island on one of the bar stools. I didn't have the energy to stand anymore. I poured myself a glass of tap water. I didn't touch the wine. The wine was for the guests. 6 o'clock. The grandfather clock chimed in the hall. Bum, bum, bum. It sounded like a funeral toll. And then the logic started to click into place. A cold, hard logic that hurt more than my back. If Rodney and Amanda were late, that was one thing. But what about the others? Amanda's parents were coming from the hotel. Her sister was driving from the next town over. Her brother was coming from the airport. 16 people. 4 or 5 different cars. They couldn't all be stuck in traffic. They couldn't all have flat tires. They couldn't all have dead batteries. If Amanda's mother was running late, she would have called me. She was a stickler for etiquette. If her brother was lost, he would have called for directions. The silence wasn't an accident. The silence was coordinated. I stood up and walked into the dining room. I looked at the 16 empty chairs. I looked at the folded napkins. I looked at the little place cards I had written out by hand in my best cursive script. Rodney, Amanda, Uncle Jim, Aunt Sarah. They weren't coming. None of them were coming. A wave of nausea hit me. I had to grab the back of Rodney's chair to steady myself. It wasn't just that my son was late. It was that he had directed everyone else away. Rodney must have told them. He must have told Amanda's parents, her sister, her brother. He must have told them to go somewhere else. But he hadn't told me. Why? Why would he do that? Did he forget? How do you forget the person cooking the dinner? How do you forget the person paying for the dinner? I looked at my reflection in the dark dining room window. An old woman in a red velvet dress, pearls around her neck, lipstick bleeding slightly into the cracks around her mouth, standing alone in a room set for a party that wasn't happening. I felt foolish. That was the overwhelming emotion. I felt stupid. I had believed him. This will be the best Christmas yet, Mom. I walked over to the table and picked up Rodney's place card. I crushed it in my hand. The cardstock crumpled easily. My phone buzzed. I jumped, nearly dropping the crushed paper. I scrambled for the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. A text, a call. It was a notification from the weather app. Winter storm warning in effect until midnight. I let out a breath that sounded like a sob. But I didn't cry. I couldn't cry. I was too confused. I was paralyzed by the sheer logistics of the betrayal. Where were they? Were they at a restaurant? Were they at Amanda's sister's house? And why was I the only one who didn't know? I walked back to the kitchen. The smell of the turkey was now cloying, overpowering. It smelled like wasted effort. It smelled like money I would never get back. I turned the oven off. The click of the dial was loud in the quiet kitchen. I looked at the food. Pounds and pounds of food. Enough to feed an army. Enough to feed a family that apparently didn't exist. I wasn't a mother today. I wasn't a grandmother. I was just the help. And the help hadn't been informed that the reservation was canceled. I sat there in the dim light of the stove hood, the cooling turkey crackling softly as it settled, and listened to the silence. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. By 7 o'clock, the worry had turned into a physical pain in my chest. It wasn't just anxiety anymore. It felt like a heart attack. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to clasp them together just to keep them still. I was pacing the length of the kitchen, from the refrigerator to the back door, over and over again. Every time I passed the oven, I felt the residual heat radiating from the cold turkey, accusing me. They're dead, I thought. It was the only explanation that made sense. Rodney wouldn't just not show up. He wouldn't leave me with $500 worth of food and a table set for 16 people unless something catastrophic had happened. There had been a pile-up on the highway. They were in a ditch somewhere, buried under the snow, unable to reach their phones. I needed to know. I couldn't just stand here and wait for the police to knock on my door. I went into the living room and grabbed my iPad from the coffee table. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, my knees knocking together. I opened the cover and put on my reading glasses. The screen was bright, hurting my eyes in the dim room. I was going to check the local news. I wanted to see the traffic reports. I wanted to see if there were any major accidents reported on I-95. But my finger hovered over the blue Facebook icon. I don't use Facebook much, mostly just to see pictures of my friends' grandchildren or to share a recipe now and then. But I knew that Amanda's sister, Jessica, lived on her phone. She posted everything. If they were stuck in traffic, she would have posted a complaint about it. If they were waiting for a tow truck, she would have posted a picture of the flat tire. I tapped the icon. The app loaded slowly, the little circle spinning and spinning. Please be okay, I whispered. Please just be stuck in traffic. The feed refreshed. And there it was. It wasn't a traffic report. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a live stream video. The little red live button was blinking in the corner of the post. It had been posted 12 minutes ago by Jessica. The caption read, "Best decision ever to ditch the stuffy family tradition. Hibachi Christmas for the win. Hashtag no drama, hashtag fun Christmas, hashtag sake bombs." My breath hitched in my throat. I stared at the words, trying to make them make sense. Stuffy family tradition? Was that me? Was my home, with the wedding china and the hand-polished silver, the stuffy tradition? I pressed play. Sound exploded into my quiet living room. It was loud, the clatter of spatulas on a metal grill, the roar of a flame flaring up, and laughter. So much laughter. The camera panned around a large, U-shaped table at a Japanese steakhouse. There was Amanda's father, red-faced and laughing holding up a beer. Not the $48 Cabernet I had bought him. A beer. There was Amanda's mother, clapping her hands as a chef tossed a shrimp into her mouth. She missed, and everyone cheered. There was Amanda, looking beautiful in a green sequin dress I had never seen before. She was leaning against her sister, holding a cocktail with a little umbrella in it. She looked relaxed. She looked happy. And then the camera swung to the end of the table. There was Rodney, my son, the boy I had raised, the man who had called me 3 weeks ago, begging me to help them out. He was wearing the sweater I gave him last year. He had his arm around Amanda's brother. He was laughing so hard his eyes were crinkled shut. He looked carefree. He didn't look like a man who was worried about his mother sitting alone in a big house. He didn't look like a man who remembered he had a mother. I watched the video loop. I watched it 3 times. I zoomed in on the table. I saw the piles of fried rice. I saw the onion volcano smoking on the grill. I saw the empty sake cups. They weren't in a ditch. They weren't in the hospital. They were at Benihana. They were 20 minutes away at the mall. The iPad slipped from my fingers and landed on the couch cushion with a soft thud. I felt cold, colder than I had ever felt in my life. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice. I closed my eyes, and the pieces of the puzzle slammed together, sharp and jagged. The vagueness about the arrival time, the kitchen renovation excuse, the request for me to host everyone. I realized exactly what had happened. They had made a reservation at the hibachi place weeks ago, but maybe they weren't sure they could get a table for 16 people on Christmas Day. Maybe they were worried the weather would be too bad to drive to the mall. So they needed a backup plan. I was the backup plan. I was the safety net. If the restaurant canceled, or if the roads were bad, or if they just didn't feel like going out, they could always come to Mom's. Mom would have food. Mom would be waiting. Mom is always waiting. But the reservation held. The roads were fine. And they decided they would rather watch a chef flip an egg than sit at my dining table and make conversation with me. And the worst part, the part that made bile rise in my throat, they didn't even have the decency to cancel. They just didn't show up. They let me cook. They let me clean. They let me buy the wine. They let me wait. Because if they had told me, I might have gotten angry. I might have made them feel guilty. And they didn't want guilt. They wanted hashtag, no drama. I looked at the hashtag again. Hashtag, no drama. That's what I was to them. Drama. Stuffy. An obligation. I stood up. My knees didn't hurt anymore. The adrenaline of fear had been replaced by something much hotter, much sharper. I walked into the dining room. I looked at the table I had set with such love. I looked at the centerpiece I had made with fresh pine branches and cranberries. I picked up the bottle of expensive Cabernet that was sitting on the sideboard. I looked at the label. Reserve. He notices, Rodney had said. No, he didn't. He didn't notice anything. He didn't notice that his mother was a human being with feelings. He didn't notice that I had spent my heating bill money on this wine. He didn't notice that I was a person. To him, I was just an appliance. An appliance that you turn on when you need it and ignore when you don't. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but I wiped it away angrily. I wasn't going to cry for them. Not anymore. I walked over to the window and looked out at the dark street. The snow had stopped. The world was silent, but inside me, the silence was gone. I thought about the video again. I thought about the caption. Best decision ever. They thought they had gotten away with it. They thought I was just a sweet, confused old lady who would be waiting by the phone, worried sick. They probably thought they could call me tomorrow with some lie about a car breakdown or a sudden illness, and I would forgive them. Because that's what mothers do. We forgive. We absorb the pain. So our children don't have to feel the guilt. But looking at that empty table, looking at the congealed potatoes and the dry turkey, I realized something. I was done absorbing the pain. I wasn't sad anymore. I was furious. And more than that, I was awake. For years, I had been asleep, dreaming of a family that loved me as much as I loved them. That video woke me up. I looked at the food. 16 servings of gourmet food. Well, I said aloud, my voice startlingly loud in the empty room, I'll be damned if I let this go to waste. I wasn't going to sit here and eat a cold turkey sandwich and cry. I wasn't going to let them win. They wanted a fun Christmas. Fine. They could have their onion volcano. I was going to have a Christmas they would never forget. I turned away from the window and marched back into the kitchen. I grabbed my iPad again, but this time I wasn't looking for traffic reports. I was looking for the local community group. I had a plan, and it didn't involve saving leftovers for ungrateful children. I'm shaking just telling you this part. If you have ever felt invisible after doing everything for your family, please subscribe. It tells me I'm not just a ghost in my own home. But if you think I'm just a bitter old woman who expects too much from her busy son, then go to the comments and tell me exactly why you think a mother doesn't deserve a simple phone call. I stood in the center of my kitchen, the iPad clutched in my hand like a shield. The video of Rodney and Amanda laughing at the hibachi grill was still paused on the screen, but I wasn't looking at it anymore. I was looking at the turkey. It was sitting there on the cooling rack, majestic and golden. The skin was perfectly crisp. The smell of rosemary and thyme was still heavy in the air, but now, mixed with the silence of the house, it just smelled like waste. $500. That number kept ringing in my head. I thought about my bank account. I thought about the winter coat I decided not to buy this year because I wanted to pay for the premium ingredients. I thought about the extra hours I spent couponing for my regular groceries just to save up for this one meal. In my generation, you don't waste food. You just don't. It's a sin. It's disrespectful. And the idea of scraping 20 pounds of organic free-range turkey into the garbage disposal because my son decided he wanted an onion volcano instead of his mother's cooking, well, that made me feel sick. I looked at the clock. 7:15. The food was still warm. The rolls could be reheated. The salad was still crisp in the fridge. I walked into the dining room. The table was still perfect. The crystal glasses were sparkling. The napkins were still folded like little soldiers standing at attention. It looked like a spread in a magazine. It looked like a home that was ready to welcome people. I remembered something. A few days ago, I was scrolling through the Westwood Neighborhood Watch group on Facebook. Usually, it's just people complaining about someone not picking up after their dog, or asking if anyone knows a good plumber. But around the holidays, I had seen a few posts that were different. There was one from an older gentleman down the street, Mr. Henderson. He had asked if any restaurants were open on Christmas Day because he didn't feel like cooking for one. There was another from a young woman asking if there were any food pantries open because her hours had been cut at work. At the time, I had scrolled past them. I had felt a little pang of sympathy, but I was too busy focusing on my own perfect family Christmas. I was too busy polishing silver to pay attention to the loneliness right outside my front door. Well, I wasn't busy anymore. I pulled out my chair, the one at the head of the table, and stood on my tiptoes. I held my iPad up high. I snapped a picture. I checked it. It was a good photo. The candlelight made the china gleam. You could see the steam rising from the gravy boat I had just filled. It looked inviting. It looked expensive. I opened the Facebook group. My heart was thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Was I really going to do this? Was I going to air my dirty laundry to the whole neighborhood? If I posted this, people would know. They would know my family didn't show up. They would know I was alone. There is a certain shame in being an abandoned mother. It feels like a failure, like you raised a child who doesn't love you, so it must be your fault. But then I looked at the empty chairs again. The shame was already there. Rodney had put it there. I couldn't make it worse, but maybe I could make it useful. I started typing. My fingers were steady now. Merry Christmas, neighbors, I wrote. I paused. I needed to be honest, but I didn't want pity. I wanted guests. My large family gathering was canceled at the last minute due to unforeseen circumstances. I currently have a full Christmas dinner. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, the works, hot and ready for 16 people. It would break my heart to see this go to waste. I took a breath. This was the hard part. If you are alone tonight, if your plans fell through, or if you are just hungry and don't want to cook, please come over. My door is open. No questions asked. Just good food and a warm house. 42 Oak Creek Lane. Please help me eat this turkey. I hit post. The little blue bar zipped across the screen. Posted. I stared at the screen. Now came the fear. What if nobody came? What if I sat here for another hour, and the only thing that happened was people reacting with sad emojis? What if being rejected by strangers hurt more than being rejected by my son? I imagine the neighbors seeing it and whispering, "Look at poor Muriel. Her son finally dumped her. Now she's begging for company." I almost deleted it. My finger hovered over the 3 little dots in the corner. But then a notification popped up. Ping. It was a comment from Joan Gable. Joan lived 3 houses down in the yellow ranch-style house. We had lived on the same street for 20 years. We waved when we got the mail. We exchanged polite nods when we were raking leaves. But I didn't know her. I knew she was a widow, like me. I knew her daughter lived in California. I tapped the notification. Joan wrote, "Muriel, are you serious? I'm sitting here eating a frozen lasagna and feeling sorry for myself. I would love to come." Tears pricked my eyes. Real tears this time, not angry ones. I typed back, "I am very serious, Joan. Please come. The wine is already open." Ping. Another comment. This one from a name I didn't recognize. Mike D., my wife, and I just moved into the rental on the corner. We couldn't afford to fly back to Ohio this year. We were literally just talking about making grilled cheese. Is it okay if we come? We can bring a pie. I typed, "No pie needed, Mike. Just bring yourselves. Come on over." Ping, ping, ping. The likes started rolling in. The hearts. Then the doorbell rang. I jumped. It had only been 10 minutes. I smoothed down my red velvet dress. I patted my hair. I walked to the front door. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. This was it. I was opening my home to the world because my family had closed their world to me. I opened the door. Joan Gable was standing there. She was wearing a thick wool coat over a simple sweater and slacks. She was holding a bottle of sparkling cider. She looked at me, and her eyes were a little red-rimmed, like she had been crying, too. "Muriel," she said. Her voice was thick. "I hope this isn't intruding." "Not at all," I said, and I meant it. "Please, Joan, come in out of the cold." She stepped into the foyer. She looked around at the garland on the banister, the lights, the smell of the food wafting from the dining room. "Oh, she whispered. "It smells heavenly. I can't believe." She trailed off, looking at me. "Your family didn't come." I looked her in the eye. I didn't feel the shame I thought I would. I just felt a strange sort of solidarity. "They had other plans," I said simply. "Their loss is our gain." Joan smiled. It was a genuine, crinkly-eyed smile. "Well, I'd say so. I was dreading tonight. The house gets so quiet. I know, I said. I know exactly what you mean. The doorbell rang again. Joan and I both turned. That must be the young couple from the corner, I said. I opened the door again. A young man and woman, maybe in their late 20s, stood there shivering. They looked nervous, like they were afraid they had the wrong house. The boy was holding a cheap grocery store apple pie. Hi, the girl said. I'm Sarah. This is Mike. We saw the post. Come in. I ushered them inside. You're just in time. The turkey is resting. Thank you so much, Mike said, stepping onto the rug and stomping the snow off his boots. We felt so stupid not going home, but the tickets were $600 and... Don't apologize, I told him. You're here now. That's what matters. I took their coats. I hung them in the closet that was supposed to be filled with Amanda's fur-lined parka and Rodney's cashmere coat. I looked at the three of them standing in my hallway. Joan, Sarah, Mike. Strangers, really. People I had lived next to but never really seen. The house didn't feel big and empty anymore. It felt cozy. It felt purposeful. Well, I said, clapping my hands together. Who eats ham and who eats turkey? Because we have both. And I have 5 bottles of very expensive Cabernet that aren't going to drink themselves. Joan let out a laugh. I'll help you carry things in Muriel. I can carve. Mike offered. I worked at a deli in college. I'll take the wine, Sarah said, grinning. We walked into the dining room together. The silence was gone. The heavy, suffocating silence of waiting for Rodney was replaced by the sound of boots on hardwood, zippers unzipping, and tentative, grateful laughter. I looked at the empty table. It wasn't empty anymore. I wasn't waiting for permission to have a Christmas. I was making one. And for the first time all day, the ache in my back didn't bother me a bit. By 8 o'clock, my dining room didn't look like a mausoleum anymore. It looked like a party. Mike, the young man from the corner rental, had taken charge of the carving knife. He wasn't doing it with the stiff, formal precision that Rodney usually did, where he'd make a show of sharpening the blade for 5 minutes while everyone watched in silence. Mike was just hacking away happily, piling thick, steaming slices of white meat onto the platter. This looks incredible, Muriel, he said, sneaking a piece of skin and popping it into his mouth. Oh my God! Sarah, you have to try this. It's better than the deli. Sarah laughed, reaching over to steal a piece. Don't fill up on skin, Mike. I see those sweet potatoes. I stood by the sideboard, holding a bottle of the $48 Cabernet. I poured a generous glass for Joan, then one for myself. To the chef, Joan said, raising her glass. Her eyes were bright. She looked 10 years younger than she had standing on my porch an hour ago. To the chef, Mike and Sarah chorused. We clinked glasses. The crystal rang out, a clear, happy bell sound that seemed to chase away the last of the shadows in the corners of the room. We sat down. I took my seat at the head of the table. Usually, when Rodney and Amanda came over, this moment was filled with tension. I would sit there, holding my breath, waiting for the first critique. Amanda would usually take a small bite, chew slowly, and say something like, "The turkey is a little dry, isn't it? Did you brine it for the full 24 hours?" Or Rodney would push the green beans around his plate and ask, "Is there dairy in this? You know I'm trying to cut down on dairy." I was always apologizing. I was always jumping up to get salt or butter or a different serving spoon, trying to fix things that weren't broken. But tonight, this is the best stuffing I've ever had. Joan mumbled around a mouthful. "Is that sage?" "Fresh sage," I said, beaming. "And chestnuts." "Chestnuts," Sarah exclaimed. "That is so fancy. I feel like I'm in a movie." I watched them eat. They weren't critiquing. They were devouring. They were scraping their plates clean. They were asking for seconds before they had even finished their first. I took a bite of the turkey. It wasn't dry. It was perfect. The potatoes were rich and creamy. The wine was smooth and velvety. For the first time in years, I actually tasted my own cooking. Usually I was too stressed to eat. Today I was starving. We talked. We didn't talk about politics or the kitchen renovation or whose child got into which Ivy League school. We talked about real things. Joan told us about her husband, who had passed 5 years ago, and how he used to dress up as Santa for the neighborhood kids. I remembered seeing him years ago. I hadn't known that was him. Mike and Sarah told us about their wedding, which they had done at a courthouse because they were saving for a house. They talked about how scary it was to move to a new town where they didn't know anyone. We were really lonely, Sarah admitted, tearing off a piece of a dinner roll. We were pretending it was fine, just the two of us. But it didn't feel like Christmas until we saw your post. I was lonely too, I said. The words came out easily. I didn't feel the need to hide it. I thought I was going to spend the night staring at the wall. Well, thank God for bad families, Mike said, raising his wine glass. We all laughed. It was a shocked, honest laugh. Here, Joan said, to bad families who leave good food behind. As the dinner wound down, and we moved on to the dessert, the creme brulee that I had torched myself, the mood shifted from hungry to playful. The wine had loosened everyone up. The heat of the house had flushed our cheeks. Sarah pulled out her phone. It was one of those new ones with the 3 camera lenses on the back. We have to document this, she said. Nobody is going to believe we lucked into a 5-star meal with the best neighbors ever. She stood up and walked around to my side of the table. Come on, everyone squeeze in. Muriel, you get in the middle. You're the queen of the night. I hesitated for a split second. I thought about my hair. I thought about the red lipstick that had probably worn off. But then I looked at Joan, who was already leaning in, smiling. I looked at Mike, who was making a funny face with a turkey leg bone. I leaned in. I put my arm around Sarah's waist. I raised my wine glass. Cheese. Sarah yelled. Click. She pulled the phone back and looked at it. Oh, this is gold. Look. She turned the screen toward me. I looked at the photo. I didn't look like a sad, abandoned old woman. I looked radiant. My eyes were crinkled at the corners. My smile was wide and genuine, showing teeth. The red velvet dress looked festive, not desperate. I looked like a woman who was having the time of her life. In the background, you could see the empty wine bottles, the ravaged turkey carcass, the chaotic joy of a real feast. Send that to me, I said. My voice was steady. Airdropping it now, Sarah said. My phone pinged on the table. I opened the photo. I stared at it. And then a thought crystallized in my mind. It was sharp and cold and delicious. Rodney and Amanda were probably still at the Japanese steakhouse. Or maybe they were driving home, feeling smug about their drama-free night. They probably assumed I was sitting in the dark, crying. They probably thought they held all the cards. I opened Facebook. I didn't navigate to the private neighborhood group this time. I went to my main wall, the public one, the one where Rodney was tagged, the one where Amanda's mother was friends with me, the one where all the relatives who had been diverted to the restaurant would see. I uploaded the photo. I needed a caption. I didn't want to be passive-aggressive. I didn't want to write, "Wish my son was here." That sounds pathetic. That sounds like begging. I wanted them to know that I didn't need them. I typed slowly, my finger hitting the keys with purpose. Christmas isn't about blood. I wrote. I paused. I took a sip of wine. It's about love. So grateful for my real family tonight. The house is full, the hearts are full, and the wine is flowing. I looked at the faces of the strangers around my table. Best Christmas ever. I hit post. I felt a rush of adrenaline that was better than any drug. It was the feeling of cutting a cord. I put the phone face down on the table. Everything okay? Joan asked, touching my arm gently. I looked at her. I smiled, and this time it reached all the way to my soul. Better than okay, I said. Now, who wants coffee? I have the good stuff. I'll help you brew it, Joan said, standing up. I'm on dish duty, Mike announced, grabbing a stack of plates. No, Muriel, sit down. You cooked. You don't clean. That's the rule. I like that rule, I said. I sat back in my chair at the head of the table. I listened to the clatter of plates being carried to the kitchen. I listened to Sarah laughing at something Mike said. My phone buzzed against the wood of the table. I didn't look at it. It buzzed again and again, a rapid-fire succession of notifications. I knew who it was. I knew exactly who it was. It was the sound of regret. It was the sound of panic. I took another sip of my wine and let it buzz. I had guests to entertain, and for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't just a mother waiting for her son to come home. I was Muriel, and I was having a party. It felt so good to finally choose my own happiness. If you're proud of me for opening my door to strangers, please hit subscribe to join my table. But if you think I was wrong, if you think I should have saved that food for the son who abandoned me, then tell me in the comments. I want to know why you think his comfort matters more than my dignity. The kitchen was filled with the smell of brewing coffee and the rich, burnt sugar scent of the creme brulee I had just pulled from the counter. It was 9 o'clock. Usually by this time on Christmas, I would be exhausted. I would be standing at the sink, scrubbing roasting pans while Amanda sat in the living room checking her emails and Rodney watched football. I would be aching for the day to be over, so I could finally sit down. But tonight, I was energized. I was leaning against the counter, holding a saucer while Mike loaded the dishwasher. He insisted. He said he had a system for loading plates that defied the laws of physics, and I was happy to let him prove it. Sarah was choosing a song on her phone to play through the little Bluetooth speaker she had brought in from her bag. Joan was cutting slices of the pecan pie she had found in the freezer, a backup pie I always kept, just in case. We were laughing about something Mike had said, a joke about his first attempt at cooking a turkey where he forgot to take the plastic bag of giblets out of the cavity. Then the phone rang. It wasn't a text vibration this time. It was the full, loud, jarring ringtone I had set for family members so I wouldn't miss their calls from the other room. Ring, ring, ring. The laughter in the kitchen died instantly. Sarah reached out and paused the music. Mike stopped clattering the plates. Joan looked at me, her knife hovering over the pie. Everyone knew who it was. I looked at the phone, sitting on the island. The screen was lit up bright. Rodney. My stomach gave a little lurch, that old reflex of jump when he calls. For decades, that ringtone meant I was needed. It meant I had to drop everything to babysit or lend money or listen to a complaint. It rang again. It sounded desperate, angry almost. You don't have to answer that, Muriel, Joan said softly. She put the knife down. You really don't. I looked at the phone. Then I looked at my new friends. They looked protective. They looked ready to defend me. But I realized I didn't need defending. And I didn't need to hide. If I didn't answer, Rodney would think I was sulking. He would think I was sitting in the dark, staring at the phone, punishing him with silence. He would think he still had the power to ruin my night. I picked up the phone. I took a deep breath, took a sip of my wine, and swiped the green button. Hello, I said. My voice was light, airy. I sounded like I had just walked in from a garden party. Mom. Rodney's voice exploded into my ear. He was shouting. I could hear background noise, dishes clattering, people talking loud. They were still at the hibachi place. Mom, are you there? God, I've been trying to call you for 10 minutes. Oh, have you? I asked pleasantly. I didn't hear it. It's a bit of a madhouse here. A madhouse? He sounded confused. Then his voice dropped, turning suspicious. Mom, I saw the picture. Amanda's mom showed me. Who are those people? Which people, dear? The people in your dining room. The guy with the carving knife. Who is that? Is he a stranger? I looked at Mike. He gave me a thumbs up. That's Mike, I said. He's a neighbor. He carves a turkey beautifully. Much faster than you, actually. And Sarah is here. And Joan. Neighbors? Rodney sputtered. You invited neighbors? To our Christmas dinner. Well, it wasn't really your Christmas dinner anymore, was it, Rodney? I said. I didn't say it meanly. I said it like I was stating a fact about the weather. You weren't here. And the food was getting cold. It seemed silly to let it spoil. Mom, listen, he started stammering. The panic was setting in. He realized the narrative was slipping away from him. We got held up. It was crazy. The traffic was bumper to bumper. And then the signal was bad, so I couldn't call, and we thought we'd grab a quick bite while we waited for the roads to clear. Lies. Sloppy, lazy lies. The mall was 20 minutes away. There was no traffic, and he had posted a video using the restaurant's Wi-Fi. I felt a little spark of pity for him. He sounded so small. He sounded like a teenager caught sneaking in past curfew. Rodney, I interrupted him. We're coming now, he rushed on. We're asking for the check. We'll be there in 30 minutes. Don't let them eat everything. We have the gifts. Oh, don't be silly, I said. I let out a little laugh. Don't come now. The party is winding down. And honestly, dear, what? I completely forgot you weren't here. There was silence on the other end of the line. Dead silence. The background noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. You forgot, he whispered. I did, I said. We were having such a lovely time. The wine is delicious. By the way, you were right about the vintage. Joan loves it. You open the wine? His voice cracked. The $48 Cabernet. We opened all of them. I lied. We had only opened 3. But I wanted him to feel the pinch. Anyway, Rodney, look, I really can't stay on the phone. Sarah is putting on a dance song, and I promised I'd try the pecan pie. You guys stay there. Enjoy your, what was it? Onion volcanoes. Mom, wait. We can catch up next week. Or whenever you're free. No rush. Mom, do not hang. Merry Christmas, Rodney. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button. Click. I stared at the black screen for a second. I waited for the guilt to hit me. I waited for that familiar sinking feeling of, I was too hard on him, or I should have listened. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt lighter. I felt like I had just taken off a pair of shoes that were 2 sizes too small and had been pinching my feet for 30 years. I looked up. Mike, Sarah, and Joan were staring at me, eyes wide. Did you just? Mike started, a grin spreading across his face. Did you just tell him you forgot him? I believe I did, I said. And did you tell him we drank all the wine? Joan asked, looking at the 3 unopened bottles still on the rack. I might have exaggerated that part, I admitted with a wink. Sarah burst out laughing. Oh, my God, Muriel, you are my hero. That was brutal. It was so polite, but it was absolutely brutal. He wanted a drama-free Christmas, I said, walking over to the counter and picking up my dessert plate. I just gave it to him. I took a bite of the creme brulee. The sugar crunch was perfect. The custard was cool and creamy. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. My phone didn't ring again. Rodney knew better. He knew, for the first time in his life, that he couldn't just talk his way back in. He had been replaced, not by another son, but by my own self-respect. Now, I said, turning to my real guests, turn that music back up. I believe this party isn't over yet. It took me 70 years to finally hang up that phone. If you support a mother standing up for herself, please like and share this video. It's the only hug I get these days. But if you think I was too harsh on my poor son, just comment below and tell me why I should keep setting myself on fire just to keep him warm. I really want to understand your logic. The doorbell rang at 10 o'clock the next morning. It was Boxing Day. The sun was streaming through the front windows, bright and unforgiving against the snow outside. Usually, the morning after Christmas, I would be up at 6. I would be frantically vacuuming, trying to erase any trace of the holiday mess. I would be washing the linens, scrubbing the gravy stains out of the tablecloth, and putting the good china back in the cabinet, so everything looked perfect again. But not today. Today, I was sitting in my favorite armchair in the living room. I was wearing my thick, plush bathrobe and my fuzzy slippers. I had a mug of hot coffee in my hands. And the house was a glorious mess. There were wine glasses still sitting on the coffee table, stained with the red dregs of the Cabernet. There were plates stacked loosely on the sideboard with crumbs of pecan pie still on them. There was wrapping paper, the cheap, shiny kind Mike had used to wrap a funny gag gift he found in his car for me, crumpled on the rug. It looked like people lived here. It looked like people had fun here. The doorbell rang again, longer this time. Impatient, I didn't jump. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I savored the bitterness. Then, I set the mug down and stood up. I didn't rush to fix my hair. I didn't check my lipstick in the mirror. I just walked to the door. I opened it. Rodney and Amanda were standing there. They looked rough. Rodney had dark circles under his eyes. He was wearing the same sweater he had on in the video, but it looked rumpled now. Amanda was holding a stack of perfectly wrapped gifts, her face tight and pinched. They looked like people who hadn't slept well. Good, Mom, Rodney said, letting out a breath like he had been holding it since yesterday. Hi. He stepped forward to hug me. Usually I would melt. I would hug him back, so tight, grateful for the crumb of affection. Today, I just stood there. I let him wrap his arms around me, but I didn't lean in. I felt like a statue. He pulled back, sensing the difference. He looked confused. Can we come in? Amanda asked. Her voice was sharp, scanning the hallway behind me. I suppose, I said, but keep your shoes on. The floor is sticky from the champagne. There hadn't been champagne, but they didn't know that. I walked back into the living room and sat down in my chair. I didn't offer them coffee. I didn't offer to take their coats. I just watched them. They walked in and stopped dead. They were looking at the wine glasses. They were looking at the extra chairs still pulled up around the dining table. They were looking at the life that had happened without them. Wow, Rodney said, looking at the empty bottles on the sideboard. You guys really went for it. We did, I said calmly. Who were they? Amanda asked. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the expensive china on the table, probably checking for chips. Rodney said you invited strangers. Not strangers. I corrected her. Neighbors, friends, people who were hungry. Rodney cleared his throat. He sat down on the edge of the sofa, looking uncomfortable. He was holding a gift bag. It was small, generic, probably a candle or a scarf they picked up at the gift shop on the way over. Mom, look, he started. About yesterday. We feel terrible. We really do. It was just, things got chaotic and we made a bad call. We didn't mean to hurt you. I know, I said. He blinked. You do. Yes, I said. You didn't mean to hurt me. You just didn't care if you did. There's a difference. Rodney flinched like I had slapped him. That's not fair. It's perfectly fair, I said, but honestly, Rodney, you don't need to apologize. I don't. No, you actually did me a huge favor. Amanda looked at Rodney, then back at me. A favor. I smiled. It was a real smile, not a polite one. Yes, I realized something yesterday while I was eating that turkey with Joan and Mike. I realized I hate cooking for 16 people. What? Rodney laughed nervously. Mom, you love hosting. You always say it's your favorite time of year. I said that because I thought it was the only way to get you to visit. I said, the truth hung in the air, simple and heavy. I spent 3 days on my feet. I spent $500. I made myself sick with stress trying to make everything perfect for a family that would rather go to a mall hibachi grill. Mom, it wasn't like that. Rodney started. It was exactly like that. I cut him off. And that's okay. Really? Because now I know you don't want the big traditional dinner. You want easy. You want hashtag. No drama. I used the hashtag. I saw Amanda's eyes widen. She knew I had seen the post. So I continued. I'm retiring. Retiring? Rodney asked. From what? From hosting? I said, I won't be doing Christmas dinner next year. Or Easter. Or Thanksgiving. The room went silent. I could hear the refrigerator humming. But Rodney stammered. But where will we go? Amanda's parents. They expect the home-cooked meal. Then Amanda can cook it, I said pleasantly. Amanda's jaw actually dropped. I can't cook a turkey, Muriel. Our kitchen is too small. Then you can go to Benihana, I said. I hear the onion volcano is lovely. Rodney rubbed his face with his hands. Mom, you're just being emotional. You're angry. We get it. We'll make it up to you. Next year, we promise we'll be here at noon. We'll help you cook. No, you won't, I said, because I won't be here. What do you mean? Joan, Gable, the neighbor you were worried about. She and I had a long talk over the pecan pie last night. She belongs to a travel club for seniors, single women who want to see the world. I leaned forward. They're going to Italy next Christmas, I said, and I'm going with them. Italy? Rodney shouted, Mom, you can't go to Italy. It's expensive. You're on a fixed income. I said, but I did the math this morning. Do you know how much money I spend on Christmas gifts for people who don't visit me? How much I spend on food that goes cold? How much I spend on heating this big house for guests who don't show up? I took a sip of my coffee. If I stop doing all that, I can afford Italy just fine. Rodney looked pale. He was doing the math too. He was realizing that the inheritance he was probably banking on was about to be spent on gelato and gondola rides. Amanda stood up abruptly. She grabbed the stack of gifts she had put on the floor. Well, she said, her voice icy, if that's how you feel, Muriel, we brought gifts for you. And gifts from the kids. But if you're too busy planning your vacation to be a grandmother. She was trying to use the weapon that always worked. The grandkids. The guilt. I stood up too. I tightened the belt of my robe. Leave the gifts on the table. I said, I'll open them later. You're not even going to open them with us. Rodney asked, sounding heartbroken. Mom, it's Christmas. I looked at the clock on the wall. 10:30. I'd love to, Rodney, but I can't. I have plans. Plans, he asked. With who? With the girls, I said. Joan, Sarah, and a few others from the neighborhood. We're meeting for brunch at the diner in town at 11. Bottomless mimosas. I have to go get dressed. I walked toward the hallway. I didn't look back. You'll have to show yourselves out. I called over my shoulder. And please lock the door behind you. I don't want anyone stealing the leftovers. I walked up the stairs. My legs felt strong. My heart felt light. I heard the front door open. I heard Amanda mutter something that sounded like unbelievable. I heard the door close with a heavy thud. I stood on the landing and listened. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of peace. It was the silence of a space that was finally, truly mine. I went into my bedroom and opened the closet. I pushed aside the gray wool slacks I usually wore to church. I reached into the back and pulled out a bright blue scarf I hadn't worn in years. I looked in the mirror. I looked old, yes, but I didn't look tired. Italy, I whispered to my reflection. It sounded like a promise. And this time, it was a promise I intended to keep. I stood at the bedroom window and watched them leave. Rodney's car, a big, shiny SUV that always looked too clean for winter, backed out of my driveway. He hesitated for a second at the end of the drive, the brake lights glowing red against the snow. I wondered if he was looking back at the house. I wondered if he was waiting for me to run out onto the porch, waving my arms, begging him to come back and eat a turkey sandwich. In the past, I would have. I would have stood in the doorway until his car disappeared around the corner, my heart aching with the silence he left behind. I would have spent the next week dissecting every word we said, wondering if I had been too needy or too quiet. But today I just watched. The car turned onto the street and drove away. I let out a breath. I felt like I had been holding for 20 years. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Yesterday, the silence felt heavy, like a blanket of lead pressing down on my chest. It felt like rejection. Today, the silence felt like space. It felt like room to breathe. I walked downstairs. The belt of my bathrobe was tied tight, holding me together. I went into the dining room. The morning sun was hitting the table, illuminating the mess we had made. There was the empty bottle of Cabernet, the first one we drank. There was the stain on the tablecloth where Mike had laughed a little too hard and spilled a drop. There was the pile of gifts Rodney and Amanda had left on the corner of the table. I walked over to the gifts. I picked one up. It was heavy. It was wrapped in gold paper with a generic tag that said, "To Mom." I didn't open it. I knew what it was. It was probably a bread maker or a robotic vacuum, something for the house, something to help me serve, something to help me clean. I put it back down. I didn't need a bread maker. I was going to Italy. I needed a passport holder. I needed good walking shoes. I started to clear the table. Usually, cleaning up after a holiday is the loneliest job in the world. You're scraping plates and throwing away napkins, and all you can think about is how tired you are. But today, as I picked up the wine glasses, I found myself humming. I remembered the look on Joan's face when she tasted the stuffing. I remembered Sarah teaching me how to take a selfie, her young cheek pressed against mine, smelling like vanilla perfume. I remembered Mike telling me that I made the best gravy he had ever tasted. I wasn't cleaning up a mess. I was archiving a memory. I loaded the dishwasher. I wiped down the counters. I threw the turkey carcass into the trash without a second thought. I didn't feel guilty about the leftovers. We had eaten well. We had laughed. That was enough. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen island. I looked around my kitchen. For so long, this house had been a waiting room. I kept it clean for them. I kept the fridge stocked for them. I kept my schedule open for them. I was Muriel, the mother. Muriel, the grandmother. Muriel, the widow. I was a supporting character in my own life, just waiting for the stars of the show to walk on stage, so I could say my lines. But yesterday, the stars didn't show up, and the show went on anyway. It was a better show. I thought about the travel brochure Joan had shown me months ago. At the time, I had brushed it off. Oh, I can't go to Europe, I had said. What if Rodney needs me to babysit? What if they want to come up for the summer? I had built a cage out of what ifs. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted rich and bold. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I realized something profound in that quiet kitchen. We spend so much of our lives watering dead plants just because we were the ones who planted them. We pour our love, our time, and our energy into relationships that have dried up years ago. We think if we just water them a little more, if we buy the more expensive wine, if we cook the bigger turkey, they'll bloom again. But dead plants don't bloom. They just rot. Yesterday, I stopped watering. I put the watering can down. And the second I did, I looked around and saw a whole garden of wildflowers growing right next to me. Joan, Sarah, Mike, the people who were actually there, the people who wanted to be there. I am 70 years old. I don't know how many Christmases I have left. Maybe 10, maybe 20, maybe just one. I refuse to spend another one looking out the window, waiting for a car that isn't coming. I checked the time. 10:45. The girls were meeting me at the diner at 11. Joan said she was going to bring the Italy itinerary. She said we needed to pick our seats on the plane. I stood up. I rinsed my coffee mug and put it in the sink. I went to the front door and checked the lock. I looked at the spot on the floor where Rodney had stood an hour ago, looking small and confused. He would be okay. Or he wouldn't. He has his wife. He has his onion volcanoes. He has his life. And now, finally, I have mine. I walked up the stairs to get dressed. I pulled the blue scarf out of the closet and wrapped it around my neck. It brought out the color of my eyes. I looked in the mirror one last time. You are enough, Muriel, I said to the woman in the glass. You always have been. I grabbed my purse. I grabbed my keys. I walked out of the house and into the bright, cold winter air. I didn't look back at the empty table. I looked forward, down the street, toward the diner, toward my friends, toward Italy. I started my car, and I drove away. We spend so much time watering dead plants just because we planted them. Yesterday, I stopped watering, and today, I feel like I'm finally blooming. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 4 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.